Hi class. Today we're going to start going through the Unit 2 problem set solutions. So please make sure you take out your problem set as well as the solutions that you've created for this problem set in preparation for our Unit 2 test. So our first questions relate to supply and demand, understanding what shifts supply and demand, understanding the difference between a change in supply or demand versus a movement along the curve, which would be a quantity demanded or quantity supplied change. So let's look at the first curve, or the first situation, 1A. It says, an increase in the quality of substitutes for a product. Okay, so this graph is depicting the supply and demand of a product, and then it says that the substitute for that product, and so for example, if your product that in question is Coca-Cola, it says an increase in the quality of a substitute for the product. So the quality of, say, Pepsi will increase. So this is showing supply and demand for Coca-Cola, while now Pepsi has gone up in quality. And so what does this mean? This means that our demand for Pepsi is likely to go down because you're more likely to shift your consumption from Coca-Cola to Pepsi because Pepsi has become better. And so here it shows our demand curve is going to be reducing or declining by shifting left. So you'll see D1. And that will result in a decline in price, which is right here. And that decline in price is going to cause the quantity supplied to also decline. So this curve depicts a change in demand, resulting in a reduction in price, which results in a reduction in quantity supplied. So here you're also going to want to see the labels that I've put on the graph. And so your axes should be labeled quantity and price with arrows. Your curves should be labeled S and D, and then D1 for the first shift in demand with an arrow as well for direction. You'll also want to label your equilibrium, your price at equilibrium, your quantity at equilibrium. And then with the shift of demand, you'll want to label your new equilibrium 1, your new price 1 with a arrow showing direction, and your new quantity 1 with an arrow showing direction. And so this would show you a fully labeled supply and demand graph. Let's look at the next situation. Country of production becomes engaged in war. So again, most of our graphs will start with our baseline supply and our baseline demand. Again, quantity and price, supply and demand are labeled. So if the country in production becomes engaged in war, it's likely that facilities may become destroyed, people may die, all those kinds of things. And so therefore, supply of all things is likely to be reduced. And so we have to draw our new supply curve here, S1. This arrow going left is a decline in supply. So remember that even though it looks like supply is kind of elevating or going higher, we're talking about reduction in supply because reduction in supply talks about quantities. And so quantities are going to be reducing in this scenario. So this is a change in supply. The whole curve changes. And that change in supply results in a price increase. You can see the arrow increase in price, which will lead to a quantity demanded decrease. So quantity demanded goes from here, this point, down to that point. And so our quantity demanded has now decreased. So I want you to look at these scenarios as a one step or one possibility. And so if you want to go into further conversation about this, the reality is if we go into a next scenario or our next stage, if you think, oh, if this country becomes engaged in war, people are also probably dying. So if people are dying, demand is probably going down as well. And so then you could legitimately probably draw a demand curve decline as well, and that will show you a whole set of other situations. And so again, none of these things are necessarily perfectly static, or some of them aren't perfectly consistent with one another depending on how you interpret it, but generally they should only show one curve, potentially two curve changes if possible. Alright, so let's go on to the next scenario. So 1C. New technology increases efficiency in production of a product. And so if you have new technology, you become more efficient in production, this will be shown by an increase in supply. So again, our labels, you'll see our labels, quantity and price. Here's supply. An increase in supply, if you can see the arrow here, it goes to the right because our quantity is increasing. This is a new S1, so at all levels of production, we can produce more, produce cheaper, etc., etc. So in an increase in supply, step 1 results in a decrease in price, which is step 2, and that decrease in price causes demanders on this demand curve to want to have more quantity demanded. So quantity demanded or quantity will increase here at our new equilibrium. Okay, so that's new technologies. So all these situations you need to think about what are the things that change supply, what are the things that change demand, and those are going to help you decipher what's happening in the moment. Let's go to 1D. And so a product that was previously illegal is now legalized. And so think about any product that this could be. It's going to cause a cascade of effects. And so let's look at our baseline scenario first. And so hopefully you can ignore some of the information here. So we'll have our quantity, our price. Our baseline demand is this curve right here, this first one, this curve D, and our baseline supply is this curve right here. Okay, curve S. And this is why labeling your curves is so important, because when you have multiple curves on a graph, it's very important for me to be able to decipher, okay, do I know that they know which curve is which, or which curve they drew first? And so if I know that that's just D and that's just S, I know that those are your baseline supply and demand curves. And so a product that was previously illegal is now legalized. And so whether you choose to consider this a supply impact or a demand impact, it's up to you, or what happens first is really up to you, because we can't definitively say which one will have happened first. But in this scenario, we can say that demand is going to increase for this product. So demand will increase for sure. So that's it, the shift in the demand going into D1. And in this scenario, we can also assume that supply is also going to go up, because now this thing is legalized, commerce will happen, privatization will happen, invisible hand will happen, because people will want to make money off of this new thing, or this newly legalized thing. And so supply will also increase to S1 here. And so what can we know for sure? We can know for sure that quantity is going to go up. Okay, because of the increase in demand and the increase in supply. What we do not know for sure is if price goes up or down. We don't know if price goes up or down because we don't know the magnitude of each supply and demand change, right? If supply increased significantly more, then price will drop. If demand increased significantly more, price would go up. But again, we don't know for sure, but we do know 100% that quantity in this scenario is going to increase. And so if you were writing a question like this, you'd probably say something like increase in price or decrease in price is unknown, depending on the scenario. Okay? Let's discuss number 1E. Country of production announces trade agreement with another country. And so here we have a supply and demand baseline graph. If we have free trade, it's likely that we're going to have an increase in supply because the availability of product, the availability of producers, I should say, increases. Right now I can buy product from my home country as well as from other countries around the world. And so if supply increases in that manner, prices are likely to drop. And because prices are likely to drop, quantity demanded, so this demand curve, quantity demanded is going to increase. Okay? And so this is going to happen when you have potential trade agreements. All right, so let's go on to the last one of this section. F, income increases per household. So again, baseline supply and demand, equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity. If demand increases, our demand curves should go up like that to D1. And if our demand increases, prices will go up, and quantity supplied will also go up at a new equilibrium. All right? So this is just a few different examples of potential supply and demand changes. So this is why it's very important not to memorize a specific graph or not to memorize specific lists of things, because the situation can change. And so memorizing what one individualized thing looks like is not going to help you when I give you a situation that you haven't seen before, because the situation that you haven't seen before is not going to be in your memory banks. What you need to do is understand what is going to change demand, understand what is going to change supply, the different scenarios that could exist, and then apply that information, apply that knowledge to a new scenario that could come up, right? So you need to be able to do that to fully get an understanding of how supply and demand works and how it may change throughout different scenarios. So let's shift gears and go to elasticity. And so identify which of these things are elastic or which of these things are inelastic. And so a relatively vertical curve is inelastic, a relatively flat or horizontal curve is elastic. So inelastic, elastic, both of these look elastic and both of these look inelastic. Okay? And so identify the change in supply or demand elasticity in each situation. So an increase in technology results in less time required to produce. So if you look at what things impact elasticity, time impacts technology or time it takes to produce something will impact supply elasticity. So if I have more technology that makes my time better, I'm able to produce things faster, my supply elasticity will increase. I'll become more elastic, okay, as a producer. B, more substitutes for a product become available. Therefore, as a demander, my elasticity of demand increases because I have the ability to change to different products. C, product becomes cheaper to produce. Supply elasticity will increase. This is similar to the technology one because I can produce cheaper or produce faster. Product becomes a necessity rather than a luxury. This makes demand more inelastic. So my inelasticity will go up or become more inelastic. Think about something like cell phones in the past 20 years. They're becoming more inelastic. Product becomes available for less time. Again, this is more inelastic. Okay, so things are of a limited release or a limited sale, so it's more inelastic. You have to go and get it right away. Product becomes easier to store. This is more elastic supply. As a producer, I'm able to store and remove it when I choose. So that's what impacts demand and supply elasticity. So very important to understand what impacts elasticity, but also important is to be able to calculate elasticity. So let's look at these questions. So our old point was at a price of $1.50, cartons of milk are sold. 300 cartons of milk are sold, and a price of $1, 350 cartons of milk are sold. So let's work through the math here. So elasticity is the change in quantity over the change in price. So what is the change in quantity here? And so quantity was 350 or 300 to 350. So 350 minus 300 is 50. And the average, 300 plus 350 divided by 2, is 325. In the same way, prices from $1.50 to $1, the difference is 50 cents. So notice that I just said absolute differences. There's no negatives, but I just want what is the absolute difference between the quantities and absolute difference between the prices. So I have 50 quantity difference and 50 cent price difference. And the average price of $1.50 and $1 is $1.25. And so this piece right here is one piece of information for quantity, and this piece right here is one set of information for price. And so 50 divided by 325 is 0.154, and 50 cents divided by $1.25 is 0.4. And this divided by this is 0.38. Therefore, this is an inelastic situation. Okay, this is inelastic demand, therefore do not change price. So let's go through this again a little bit. So my quantity change is smaller than my price change. Okay, therefore it is inelastic. The demanders cannot change that effectively. The demanders cannot change as much as the prices change, right? And so therefore suppliers should not lower price, right? Because I lowered the price as a supplier by 40%, demanders only increased how much they consume by 15%. So therefore, Why would I lower price? I should, in reality, increase price because it's inelastic, okay, in this situation, okay? Next scenario, we'll go through it a little bit quicker. We have, at a price of $700, 1,000 phones sold. At a price of $900, 650 phones are sold. So our difference in phones is 350. My average number of phones is 825. My difference in prices is 200. My average prices is 800. So 0.42 is my change in quantity. 0.25 is my change in price. And we have an elasticity of 1.68. Therefore, it is elastic because my change in quantity is greater than my change in price. Therefore, I can change more, or I'm more elastic, I'm more flexible, I'm able to change. In this situation, also do not change price because the increase in price has caused the quantity to decline more or faster, right? So therefore, in this situation, you're making less money. In this situation, you're making less money. And elasticity helps to determine why. Okay? Let's go on to our next scenario. At $6, 2,500 burgers are sold. At $5.50, 2,700 burgers are sold. So the difference in burgers, 200. The average burger is 2,600. The difference in price, 50 cents. The average price, $5.75. Change in burgers, change in quantity is less than change in price. Therefore, it is inelastic and do not change your price. So let's look at now supply elasticity calculations. So prices, quantities. So change in quantity is difference in quantity 2,000. Average quantity is 2,100 or 21,000. Change in price is 100,000. Average price is 550,000. Change in quantity is less than change in price. Therefore, this is supply inelastic. Therefore, suppliers cannot change quantities very quickly based on price changes. Next, cans of Pepsi. Quantities, difference 25. Average quantity is 87.5. Difference in price is 50 cents. Average price is 275. Change in quantity is bigger than change in price. Therefore, it is elastic. So suppliers can change quantities more than prices have changed. Last one for supply or supply elasticity. Change in quantity is 300. Average quantity is 4,150. Change in price is $10. Average price is $95. Here it is change in quantity less than change in price. Therefore, it's an inelastic supply. Suppliers cannot take advantage of the changing prices very much. That is all of our elasticity questions. Now we go on to some utility questions. So here we have a scenario, so hopefully you filled this out and can explain through it. If you have $13, pizza costs $3 each, burgers cost $2 each, how many of each do you buy? Our utility maximization formula makes us figure out what is marginal utility divided by price of pizza, what is marginal utility divided by price of burgers, because this gives us an information on utility per dollar spend when I consume pizza, and then utility per dollar spend when I consume burgers. So a couple assumptions. First of all, in this scenario, we are all utility maximizers. So if we have $13, we're going to spend all $13 in this scenario because we want to maximize our utility. Okay, and so if pizza, our first pizza gives us 30 marginal utility, but pizza costs us $3 each, then 30 divided by 3 is 10. So I get 10 marginal utility per dollar for that slice of pizza. In the same way, the second pizza is 7, the third pizza is 5, the fourth pizza is 3, the fifth pizza is 2. Okay, so that's my marginal utility divided by price for pizzas. For burgers, my first burger gives me 20 marginal utility, but burgers only cost me $2, and therefore my marginal utility divided by price is 10. In the same way, 10 divided by 2 is 5, 8 divided by 2 is 4, 4 divided by 2 is 2, 2 divided by 2 is 1. So, just in reality, what would happen here? Here, that first pizza and that first burger give me equal amounts of utility per dollar. So I'm equally happy choosing either or, so I'll just eat them both. Okay? The next scenario is that this second pizza gives me 7 utility per dollar, while the second burger gives me 5 utility per dollar. So it makes most sense for me to consume that second pizza. And so I'll consume that. The third pizza gives me 5 utility per dollar, and so that's equal to my second burger, and so I'll consume both of those if I can afford them. And then next it goes to burger, because that 4 is greater than the 3. And then the next it goes to 3, and then the 2 2s, and then the 1. Okay, so with my money, my $13, my maximization of utility comes at 3 pizzas and 2 burgers. I'll go these 2, that one, and then these 2, and then that's all the money I have. Okay, so I'll get 30 utility here, 21 utility here, and 15 utility here. Then I'll get 20 utility here, and then 10 utility there. Okay, so spending $13 on pizza of $3 and burgers of $2, I'd maximize utility consuming at 3 pizzas and 2 burgers. Next question is understanding the relationship between marginal and total utility. Marginal utility is the satisfaction from the next or additional consumption or use of a product or service. So I'm going to get more satisfaction by the next one, by the next pizza I eat, by the next thing I do, the next haircut I get, or whatever it may be. While total utility is the accumulation of all the satisfaction from a product or service in that time, in some time frame. Okay, and so the total utility is adding up all the marginal utilities. And here shows you a little bit of a graph. Marginal utility will go down, while total utility will go up, but the total utility will flatten off as a curve as you consume more and more and more of your product, because marginal utility goes down. Okay. So the next 4 topics we're going to cover are the topics of government intervention. And so you'll see here that on this solutions page, I've just had C notes because it just describes exactly what your notes describe or my video describes. And so at this moment, you can kind of stop this video if you want and go back to my video on this actual lesson to kind of review what we've gone through. But here I'll go through a very, very quick review or synopsis of ceiling prices, floor prices, subsidies, and quotas. But very quickly, so if you want a more in-depth understanding or a review of this, please go back to the video that's been posted. So here we have ceiling prices. A ceiling price cannot go above the upper limit, so a ceiling price cannot go above this point, and so therefore our ceiling prices are set typically below equilibrium. And what does a ceiling price cause? A ceiling price will cause a shortage because the quantity supplied at this low price is lower than the quantity demanded at this low price, because demanders want something that's cheaper, suppliers don't want to sell something that is cheaper. So what will happen? Producers will not make as much money. Their lineups will occur, waiting lists will occur, underground economies will occur, all those kinds of things will happen. Quantity will go down. This is inefficient, but people who buy at this low price get an advantage because they're buying something cheaper, and that makes their quality of life better. The example of the price ceiling in our notes is the rent controls. And so here in this situation, we look at what happens if demand increases for these homes or this rents. Price should go up, but if we implement a price ceiling, prices cannot go up. But that means that quantity supplied stays static here, but quantity demanded has increased quite a bit, and therefore a shortage of this housing will occur. And so with this shortage, what's going to happen to the housing that's available or the situation? One, people get better, cheaper housing. No, not better housing, cheaper housing and a better quality of life. But the disadvantages are plentiful. Shortages, waiting lists, underground economy, not efficient, quality suffers, profit will decrease. And there will be less building and supply of this type of unit because people see less advantages of it. The next of the 4 theories that we talked about is floor prices. In this scenario, floor prices talk about where prices cannot go below this equilibrium level, so they have to be above. So we want to keep prices this high. In this scenario, quantity demanded of this is very, very low because prices are high, so people don't want to buy it, while quantity supplied is very high because people want to supply it because it is going to get a higher value, and therefore there is a surplus. And so what will happen? There's going to be more stuff available, so government can typically buy the excess, sell internationally, turn into other products, and consumer of this thing is paying more than what they should be paying for this thing. So what is the scenario that we're talking about? Oh, this also reduces income. But what are we talking about here? We're talking about minimum wage. So in this scenario, demander is the employer, while the supplier is the laborer. And so we have a quantity supplied and quantity demanded of laborers. And so the supplier here is the laborer. And so the laborer wants to work. And so lots of quantity supplied when wages are higher. But demanders, producers, employers don't want to hire as many people, so quantity demanded is low. And so what will happen, right? People who have jobs have better quality of life. Competition for jobs increases because people want to work. Higher incentives for monetary incentives, higher quality of life. Increase in capital investment because business places don't want to pay for workers, so they're going to hire more, or they're going to buy more capital because it's relatively cheaper now. Disadvantages: unemployment will increase because people don't have jobs who want to have jobs. Prices for products theoretically could increase because it costs more to produce. It's an inefficient practice. Again, inefficiency is a common theme that we do not like. We do not like inefficiency. So that's the second of the four. The third is subsidy. And so subsidies talk about grants being given to companies or industry, and we want to consider why is this the case. And so here again we have supply and demand for a product or service, which at equilibrium sounds great, it's efficient, everything's going well. However, the government thinks that, you know what, we want more of this thing to be consumed. For whatever their motivations are, we're not judging the motivation, we're just judging and evaluating the actual method that they use to do this, okay? And so government believes more of this thing should be consumed. So how do we get to Q1 when we're already at equilibrium? The only way to get to Q1 is if you promise suppliers more money, where it intersects your supply curve, right? That's the only way that the suppliers will supply this much, while demanders will only buy this much if it's cheaper, right? So at equilibrium we're great, but now we want to be up here, and so we have to give suppliers this much money, and demanders only want to pay this much money. And therein lies where the government has to pay for a certain amount of subsidy, which is this triangle here. This difference, this distance, is the amount of the subsidy. And so suppliers get more money, sellers pay less, or suppliers get more money, consumers pay less money, more quantity is sold and purchased, so that's all great. However, where does this money come from? It comes from the economy, taxes, investment income, from other things that the government could be spending on, etc., etc. Also, it's inefficient. Inefficient companies will be in business longer than they probably should be, theoretically. It reduces international trade because international markets cannot compete as highly with local companies that have subsidies in their pocket. The last of the four theories we're talking about is quota, and quota is the restriction on the amount of a product that can be produced by an individual producer. What does this mean? So we have supply here, and so we're restricting how much each producer can produce, and so therefore supply is going to go down. Okay, so if we reduce supply here, what's going to happen? Prices are going to increase. So if prices increase, quantity demand is going to go down. And if quantity demand goes down, that's going to impact how much money suppliers make. However, if you notice, this demand curve is relatively inelastic, and so this depicts a higher price change than quantity change. Therefore, these suppliers are all going to make more money. So oftentimes quotas are set in place to protect local industries, to protect producers, to ensure that they make enough money to stay in business. And so you'll see that this reduction in supply has created a price increase, which creates a quantity demanded decrease, but still the revenues that these suppliers get is higher. So what are the impacts? Keeps producers in business, which is part of the goal, yet it is inefficient, but it protects industries. So see, that quickly was the Coles Notes version of ceiling prices, floor prices, subsidies, and quotas. Please go back to your notes and the videos to ensure that you have a full understanding of these concepts. Thank you.